How's it going, everyone? It's Kenneth here, and today I am not at the allotment. I wanted to shoot a video at home because it's a bit more comfortable. It's quite hot outside, and I didn't want to spend too much time messing around there trying to get everything perfect. Just be a bit more comfortable to sit at home and sort of work through everything I wanted to speak to. And part of the reason as well is I'd like to speak about something that requires a bit more attention on what I'm doing rather than sort of trying to do stuff down there in the heat, so it'll be a bit easier. But today, I wanted to speak about something that someone mentioned in a comment on a couple of videos ago, and it's about how they like the idea of also market gardening. But having watched other content creators and other sort of market gardeners on YouTube, they found that they were worried that it isn't that profitable. And I think it can be. And so I've listed a few different things that I think you would need to think about in order to make any farming business, especially on a smaller scale, profitable. So can market gardening be profitable? And I think it can. So I've listed 4 things that I think are really important to think about. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of other different things, but under these 4 sort of headings, there are various things to think about that all these things will fit into each other that will help inform your decisions. And I think they all go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And just before I carry on, my dog is walking up and down, so you might hear some pitter-pattering of her little claws on the floorboards. So anyway, these are the 4 different things I've written down. So the first thing you really need to think about, which is probably the most important, or one of the most important, is what is your growing season and what is your climate? The second one is, will your vegetables be sellable? Do you have a market to sell your vegetables in? And I'll go into detail about all of these because there's a few points below each heading. And the last one is, how much will it cost you to start your farm or your market garden, and how much will it cost to continue operating your market garden? So let's just jump straight into it. And I'll start all the way at the top. What is your growing season and your climate? I don't necessarily think this is the only important thing. Everything's important, but the reason why I think climate and growing season are one of the most important things is because context is king. If you live in a really, really dry climate and it's hot all year, that's fine. You probably be able to grow a lot of things, but do you have access to water where you are? Is there a rainy season or a wetter season? Because obviously all vegetables need water to grow. Likewise, you could live in a slightly colder climate. So, in the UK, we're known to have a lot of rain, but we do have pretty mild summers, and it can kind of be hit and miss with how much sun we get in winter, in summer. So, for example, last summer was kind of overcast quite a lot of the time, whereas this summer we're having an amazing, really, really hot, sunny summer. So you need to look at that. Where are you? What is your season like? How many months of the year is it sunny and is it dry, and how many months of the year is it sort of wet and rainy? And in that context of your climate, you need to figure out what vegetables you can grow. So some vegetables prefer cooler, sort of wetter weather. Other vegetables might want sort of warmer weather. So for example, on the news today, there was something, I think it was on the BBC, I'm not 100% sure. I'll try to find the link and I'll put it down below so you can go read. But they were saying that in Britain, there is a warning that we're going to have a shortage of lettuce, which is pretty crazy. It's one of the most common things. Salad greens is what people buy. Everyone, it's almost like a staple in your weekly shop. Well, for us it is, at least. And the reason that could be is because we're having unusually hot weather for this time of the year and a lot of sun, lettuce will tend to bolt. And that's something that you would need to think about in your climate. You don't want to grow stuff that doesn't suit where you are. So that's why I think this is quite important. The whole idea of your climate and where you are in your growing season will inform a lot of everything else you do. From what vegetables you're going to grow, will those vegetables be sellable, like I'll speak about next? On to the next one straight away. Basically, it falls into what we've just spoken about. Will those vegetables that you can grow in your climate be sellable? Will people buy them? You might have a climate that suits a very specific kind of vegetable, and you know that, oh, I'll be able to grow a lot of these, but it might be a really obscure vegetable that isn't quite popular in your region. So there will be no point in spending a lot of time and effort growing something that you know you can grow, but then you can't sell, because then you're not making money, and that would be the whole point of having a market garden, to make a living. So if the vegetables you have aren't popular and you can grow them, it sort of cuts them out the equation, because if you can't make money from them, there'd be no point in growing them. The next thing to think about on the kind of vegetables you're going to sell is, do they have a good margin? Can you make money from selling them? So for example, with tomatoes, loads of people eat tomatoes, but the problem is, once you've planted them and you've grown them, can you sell them at a high enough price to justify growing them? You know, if you've got 2 or 3 acres just of tomatoes and you specialize in them, you might be able to grow lots of different varieties that are slightly unique, or heirloom varieties, which are becoming quite popular now, especially in markets, especially in farmers markets. So it might be worth it if you can specialize in them. But if you're growing run-of-the-mill cherry tomatoes and salad tomatoes, how can you be different from a supermarket in order to be able to sell them at a high enough cost to make it worth it? You know, you can go into one of the big supermarket chains and buy a punnet of cherry tomatoes for £1, or £1.50, something like that. It's not that much money. So if you want to compete against big sellers, can you sell your tomatoes for a similar price and make it worth your while to grow them, invest time in looking after them, pruning them, keeping them healthy from disease, all that kind of thing? And the next thing about the vegetables that you want to sell, if they are sellable, can you grow enough of them? There might be a huge market demand for them, and if you start selling something but you can't grow enough of that vegetable to meet market demand, you kind of give yourself a bit of a bad name, really. So one week you might have a whole bunch of whatever it may be, and you sell out, and people come back the next week and want to buy more of it, but you can't provide it. They'll start looking elsewhere, or they might get annoyed saying, well, you have this a couple of weeks and the other weeks you don't. There's not much consistency going on here, and it psychologically, it might just put people off. Understanding the market you're in and understanding the climate you're in and the vegetables that you can grow in that climate is incredibly important, because you can grow whatever it is until the cows come home, but if you can't sell them, or if you can't make enough money from them, it's completely counterproductive and counterintuitive. So understanding those two things together, so your climate and the vegetables that grow in that climate, are go hand in hand. And like I said earlier, a lot of these things I'm speaking about all tie in some way or another to help inform the decisions you make. You've established your growing climate, you've established what vegetables you can grow, you found some things that are profitable, you can grow enough of them, and you can grow them for a certain amount of time in the year, so you know now that vegetable's worth it. Next thing you need to ask yourself, do you have a market to sell the stuff you're growing in? If you live in a tiny little village in the middle of the Cotswolds, or far away from anyone else, you might have a popular vegetable, you might be able to make a lot of money from selling it, but do you have people to buy that vegetable? So just because something is profitable and you can grow it, but if you doesn't mean it's worthwhile selling, because if you haven't got the market to sell it in, you may as well not grow that vegetable. Something else to think about is, are there other people growing the same vegetables? Are there other farmers or market gardens in your area or your town or city, wherever you are, growing that specific vegetable? And if they are, how can you differentiate from them? Because I kind of think that there's enough going around for everyone. People have this idea that competition's bad, but it's not, because if you can differentiate from yourself from one farmer, you create value. And a good way of doing that is analyzing the market and seeing if there are other growers, what they do. So again, I'll go back to tomatoes. Now, a lot of people know that tomatoes sort of come later on in summer because they've got to grow and they've got to get ripe and all that kind of thing. But let's say farmer A grows tomatoes and he sells them, and people love all the varieties he grows, but his first lot of tomatoes are only available in June. He's a seasonal grower. He's not selling, to people that are buying from the big supermarket, so they choose to buy from him, but they can only start getting his tomatoes in June. If you have access to see how he grows, or that he or she have a website you can go and see, you might discover that, they might not be doing things as productive as you think you can, and you believe that you can grow the exact same tomatoes as good quality, but you can sell them in May. So straight away you differentiate from them. You might be growing the same product, but you can give customers that same product a whole month before they do. So straight away you separate yourself from that farmer, and you provide value. So not only do you have a market to sell it in, but can you compete with what other people are doing and provide value at the same time? There are going to be staples that most people will grow and sell, but being able to provide that extra bit of value can set you apart from other people. So it's quite important to think about that kind of thing. Also, where are you going to sell your vegetables? You might be an excellent grower. You've got a good variety of stuff you can sell, but if you've got nowhere to sell them, so for example, in a farmer's market, if there's a farmer's market near where you live and they've got a few market gardeners growing there, will they accept another farmer to sell their produce at the same market? Now, they don't want to upset the other farmers that are growing there already, because it kind of, they shoot themselves in the foot. So if you haven't got a farmer's market to sell in, how else will you sell? Are there any local grocery stores near you that are independent, that will be willing to take on some of your stock and trial it and see how it goes? Will you set up sort of a vegetable box scheme, or a CSA as it's commonly known in America? That stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And the way that works is people basically pay a subscription fee, and they would normally pay up front in some circumstances, especially for a smaller grower. And you will say, well, it costs X amount and you will get vegetables for this many weeks of the year between this month and that month. If you can figure out that you've got these markets and you think you can sell the vegetables to those markets, that's really important. If you don't have the market, there's no point in selling vegetables, because you'll just grow stuff and have to eat all of them basically. And the last thing, which is probably the most important thing that I think a lot of people might leave on the back burners, which could sort of make or break you, is how much is it going to cost to start your farm, and how much is it going to cost to operate? This kind of conflicts a bit with the whole idealistic view or lifestyle of being a farmer or market gardener, because people have this idea that it's going to be this great living. I'm going to have a piece of land and my chickens and my ducks, grow some vegetables. They're all going to be organic, and that's great. But so you've got this great lifestyle in mind. But if you don't have the business part of it at the forefront in your mind, things won't work, because at the end of the day, if you're growing vegetables to make a living, the business part of it is incredibly important. So some of the things to think about are your startup costs. Let's say you're a brand new farmer, which hopefully I want to be eventually. I need to think of things like farming equipment. What will I need to buy to successfully be able to farm wherever I am? What is my access to land? Do I have to buy a piece of land from someone? How big will that piece of land be? Will I lease land? Some cases in America, Curtis Stone, for example, he leases land from people in his neighborhood. He's a proper urban farmer, and the way he pays for that is by exchanging vegetables with the people that he grows food from. So it's mainly in back gardens and things like that. So his overheads are quite low in terms of how much the land costs. And something else is your market close to your farm? And this might not seem like it's got anything to do with your startup costs and operation, but it's a huge part. If you have let's say a couple of acres or whatever it is, 50 miles from the closest town, you need to get your vegetables to that town. And if you're doing it once or twice a week, that's a couple of 100 miles. So you've got to think of, how am I going to do that? Well, I need to have a van. Now, if you have vegetables in just an ordinary little van, they're going to wilt, and it's not going to do that well in the back of a hot van. So that van needs to be refrigerated. There are fuel costs involved, and fuel's expensive, especially in England. It's not that cheap. And if you're putting a lot of time into doing that, that time is being taken away from something else. For example, growing vegetables, or being at your farm, or doing other things. So understanding what your operating costs are really, really important, because at the end of the day, the higher your overheads are, the less money you make. Can your farm be incredibly lean? Do you need to have a tractor? And in the case of a small market garden, you don't always necessarily need to have that, because if you've got 1 or 2 acres, it's big enough to be able to walk around on, where you don't have to have a huge tractor plowing fields. You can kind of do it yourself if you've got sort of small walk behind tractors, which are a lot more affordable. I mean, I don't know how much a tractor costs, but I can't imagine it's like £5,000 or £6,000. Probably costs quite a lot, really. So understanding how much you need to spend in order to start the farm and to keep it going is really, really important, because at the end of the day, your bottom line is going to be affected by how much money you spend to keep going. All of these things sort of feed into each other and bounce back and forth depending on what you want to do. So how that your access to land affects everything else is, you might be able to have a piece of land, but where is it? What's the aspect like? Is there a slope anywhere? Is there access to water on that piece of land? And that all affects your context. Is your piece of land in a small valley? Is that the climate in that valley will definitely be slightly different to a few miles down the road to a piece of land that isn't in the valley. So when you're starting a farm, having to think of all these things is really important, to sort of get it down to a T and plan all of this information out, so that before you start, you have a really good idea of what you're growing, that vegetable you're growing is going to sell, you can get a really good margin from it, and it's profitable. So to answer the question, like I said in the beginning, I do believe that market gardening can be profitable, but all of these points that I've spoken about, and I'm sure there are other points as well, all need to be considered really, really carefully before jumping into something. I think understanding the business part of what you're doing, and putting the financial side first is really, really important, because if you don't separate idealism, so this idea of being, having a farmer's life and sort of being a bit hippy dippy, it is one thing. But if you put the emphasis on that and not about making money, you won't make money. And the two sort of go hand in hand. You can have that idealistic lifestyle, but you really need to be realistic about what you're growing, where it's being sold to, and if it can make you money. You might want to grow broccoli, for example, and broccoli takes up a lot of space and it takes quite long to grow, and you might have a small piece of land, but if you put your heart and soul into like just growing broccoli on an acre, you're not going to have much broccoli to sell, and you're going to take up all your land just growing one crop. So it's not realistic, really. I know that's a bit of a very simplified idea or a simplified example, but all of these things need to be taken into consideration when deciding on starting your farm, and whether or not it's going to be worth your while. And I don't have experience in farming. I have an allotment, and it's completely different to growing on a larger scale and trying to make money from it. And straight away I've noticed, me, Matt and Katie, I go to the allotment almost every day, and we're getting a fair amount of vegetables for ourselves, but it would definitely not be enough to make money from. We might be able to sell some of the surplus vegetables to friends and family here and there, but we don't do that. We give the vegetables to our friends and family, because it's just like it's not enough excess to be even worth it. So when it comes to growing on a small scale, which is what I'd want to do anyway, all of this stuff is incredibly important. Where you're growing, what you can grow, how much you can grow, what space you have, and the market you're going to sell in. Because if you're only growing a smaller amount, which you would be on an acre or two, you need to have the high value crop that you can make money from. They all need to be popular. You need to have people to sell them to, and you need to keep your operating costs low in order to make the whole thing sustainable. I know I've jumped around a bit on this episode, and I've kind of being a bit wishy-washy, but I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm not an expert. These are all just things I've seen other people say, and more often than not they're really successful. So I hope you found value in this episode, and I'd like to thank people that comment on the videos, because you give me inspiration to make more videos. You give me topics to speak about, so I find it really helpful when people sort of interact with me. So if you've got any questions or any comments, just leave them down below. I try to reply to everyone. I get really interested in what people have to say and their viewpoints. If you like this video, hit that like button, and if you want to carry on watching these videos, hit that subscribe button. Again, I don't release a video every single week, but I try to. It's sort of a mix mash between what's going on in the allotment, and I'm going to start doing a bit more about market gardening and my process of how I want to get there. So that's what brought along this video today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I will see you guys next week. See you soon.